There is a strange thing that happened to me at the school that I was attending. I have witnessed a horrible thing happening, and I was haunted by it. I was playing with my phone in the dorm room that day because I was free and had nothing to do. My classmate Ken came over and asked me to go have some fun with him. He looked so excited. "Wait a minute, I need to finish the game." "But what's so fun about that?" He said that some of his classmates were playing some kind of pen fairy or something, like a Ouija board game. It sounded like fun, so I quickly went with him. We were looking forward to seeing what the game was like. And I realized that it wasn't just the two of us who wanted to see the fun. It seemed that the game, Ken said, was really interesting to attract so many people. There were a lot of students running to the platform on the side of the dormitory building. Perhaps they were also curious about the exciting game that was being played. I stepped forward so that I could see with my own eyes. I pushed through the crowd, and it seemed that all the students of the dormitory were gathered there. I saw 3 of my classmates sitting around a table. I wondered what crazy things these 3 guys were up to. There was a piece of paper on the desk with numbers and symbols written on it. The 3 of them took a pen together and circled something inside the thick piece of paper filled with symbols and numbers. Then we started chanting some spells. Fairy pen, you are my past life." We were surprised because we didn't understand what the hell they were saying. The 3 of them took turns reading. "You are my life. Please continue to be with me. Quickly appear, quickly appear." They were probably using this method to summon a fairy pen to appear. This game was like a Ouija board game because you would also be chanting to summon spiritual forces. But after they chanted the spell, the pen didn't move. The pen remained still, proving that there was no fairy pen here. Some viewers thought it was just a meaningless game, but others did not think so. They thought that there was a demonic force that existed. One of the 3 asked again, "Is the fairy pen here? If so, please move the pen." The 3 continued to chant spells and do crap. But to everyone's surprise, this time the pen moved. It did not stand still like before. And the pen moved and drew an irregular circle on the paper. No one knew what the pen was trying to say. Everyone present held their breath in anticipation. At this moment, the viewers were all very nervous. Everyone developed a cold sweat because no one thought that such a myth could happen in front of their eyes. And then one of those 3 asked a question. "What day is it today?" To check whether some fairy or demon was really here or not, the pen moved again and pointed to this day. The 3 of them looked at each other. They were amazed. Another asked about this age. "Pen fairy, how old am I?" And the pen answered correctly. In the presence of the people there, the pen moved to the right place with the age of the person asking the question. At that time, not only were the 3 people very tense, but the viewers also became very tense. Someone looked into the glass window on the edge of the platform. Something was quite unusual. There was a reflection of these 3 in the window, but something was not quite right, and the horror started here too. Instead of 3 shadows or reflections, because 3 people were playing this game, over here there were 4 shadows. It was clear that not only the appearance of 3 of my friends, but also an extra person. One of them looked like a cloud of black smoke, but that person was darker than the smoke, and no one knew when that young man appeared. Just then, one of the 3 seemed to sense this as well and stepped back. It seemed he had sensed danger. He pulled his hand away from the pen as if to end the game. He guessed the danger was ahead of him if he kept playing, and he actually decided to stop the game and get out of his seat. He couldn't stay calm anymore. He was totally panicked. The other 2 seemed very scared too. If they were really playing this game and stopped midway, then it would have been a disaster. They bet their lives on the game of chance. The young man who had just left suddenly vomited violently when he had only taken a few steps away. He ran to the bathroom and a few of us ran after him. As he went to the bathroom and started vomiting violently, all of us there were dumbfounded because we didn't know what was wrong with him. The scene was horrible. The smell of his vomit had a sour and foul stench, as if he had eaten dirt which swelled up in his stomach. The liquid he vomited was black and super disgusting. It was slimy. As we all got out of the restroom, we heard a loud bang on the platform as if something had fallen from upstairs. Then I saw loads of students standing on the railing and looking down. Myself and my friend also ran over curiously and looked down below. That was the first time I'd seen such a horrifying scene. The two fairy pen players from earlier jumped down from upstairs. It was terrifying. They seemed to die right there, leaving no chance of survival. Many of the people there took out their mobile phones to take pictures, and some posted them on the internet. Just as everyone was looking down the stairs, it didn't seem to end here. The crowd started screaming like something was terrible. A girl suddenly screamed violently and ran away. She kept calling for a pen. And more than one or two people jumped out of the building that night too. Things got way scarier when the player left the game and suffered the punishment of the soul. This fairy pen game was no different from the Ouija board game. After that incident, the rumors spread more and more. At the time, many people were present to watch the game. Those were the ones who would wake up the next morning with dark circles under their eyes, and they would stay swollen for a few days. The person who vomited took a few days off. I prefer not to mention the school I was attending at this point, just to avoid causing trouble, because this is indeed a true story. Today I will tell you a famous ghost story of a restaurant in Guangzhou, China. Since the opening day, the restaurant's business was very prosperous. It was profitable, and diners from many places near and far came there more and more. This restaurant was a wooden structure with 3 floors. It has undergone many repairs so far over 200 years. This incident happened in 1985. It was said that a newlywed couple booked a party at the restaurant to hold their wedding. The restaurant was also very attentive. They also invited a very lively drum and trumpet band to join the wedding fun. Guests and friends came to congratulate and sat at dozens of tables. Everyone clapped, cheered and shouted with excitement to celebrate the happiness of the young couple together. Friends and relatives all came to celebrate with their families. They took turns toasting the newlyweds and hoping that the couple would always be happy. At the party there was a little girl among the guests. Her face did not look very happy. She seemed to have encountered something. It seemed that the little girl smelled the burning smell of something, so she told the adults at the table as well as her mother. But her mother said that she didn't smell any burning there. People continued to ignore the girl because they didn't smell any burning like she said. They continued to stand up to celebrate with everyone. The little girl who told everyone before that she smelled burning now said that she saw smoke coming out of a house. The fire flared up fiercely. It was already red in the whole area. People didn't seem to feel the danger approaching. The fire might have burned everything. It spread at dizzying speed. It spread it without stopping. It burned quickly and burned all the curtains. The fire continued to burn and consume everything it passed by. It became more and more intense, but people still didn't seem to know that this was happening. The restaurant was entirely a structure built of wood, so the fire could easily be formed in an instant. It wasn't until the guests at the party began to smell the smoke that they noticed the fire was spreading to every corner and that everything and everyone was on fire. They began to run up the stairs desperately. They screamed, one running on top of the other to find a way to escape. In the thick smoke, men, women and children ran. They ran after their survival instincts, trying to find every opportunity to find a way to live. The restaurant's stairs leading down were steep and narrow. It couldn't hold everyone if they jostled each other up, and all ran down to try to get out. Before going down the stairs, flames rose from the lower floor. It seemed to want to block all exits so that it could burn everyone, including humans. Everyone seemed to want to go back up the stairs because the fire in front of them had almost burned part of their bodies. There were screams and a panic that began to ring. The guests cried out in despair, and the heat of the fire was terrible. Many people were engulfed in flames. They had no way out. They shouted as much as they could, but the fire swallowed them whole. Among the guests who could not escape, there was a man whose whole body was on fire. He rushed to the window. The others had the same fate as him. Their whole bodies were on fire. The flames completely consumed them all, and everyone rushed to the windows. Unable to withstand the terrifying heat of the fire, those who burned in the night glowed like red torches, one by one falling from the third floor to the ground. Passers-by who saw the terrible scene also panicked and wanted to find a way to rescue them, but were helpless because the fire was just too big. The whole building was engulfed in flames. Not a corner was without fire. The fire had completely consumed everything from things to people. Firefighters spent hours trying to put out the flames as quickly as possible, but the flames were too big to save anyone's life. When the fire was completely extinguished, the restaurant, which was originally magnificent, was now only a pile of ashes. Almost everything was in ruins. All were burned by the fire. Looking at this place then was no different from places that had been abandoned for many years, surrounded by the smell of burning corpses. Dozens of people were also burned to death. Bodies were scattered on the stairs, and wedding guests were then only burnt skeletons. Everyone remained the same as they were consumed by the flames. Faces were trying to scream for help, and they stretched out their arms to wait for help. On the 7th night since the terrible fire broke out, the flow of people was still passing by. As usual, the restaurant then looked extremely dilapidated. Some neighbors lived near the area next to the restaurant, and they all heard the sound of drums and trumpets shaking the quiet area. The sound was getting closer and closer. The closer it got, the louder the sound, as if some event was about to happen. That shrill sound came from the window. Everyone thought it was the house where the wedding was held, but there was no way that a family could hold a wedding at such a late night. The sound of drums and trumpets resounded deafeningly, making everyone unable to sleep. Many people got up and opened their windows to look outside to see what was going on. And they were extremely surprised when for the first time in their lives they saw such a strange sight with their own eyes. They saw a very large group of people, young and old. All were full. In the middle was a red flower palanquin. They sang while going to the restaurant where the fire broke out. All of them stopped in front of the restaurant, but these people were silent. No one uttered a word, unlike the excitement from before. After a while, suddenly everyone started to cry loudly. Young and old, everyone was screaming and crying. Something black, as if it were liquid, flowing out from the lot of the people's eyes, which looked scary. The sound of crying went straight to the eardrums. That made everyone feel uncomfortable. Those who mourned, their eyes were black. People didn't dare to listen to these sounds. They all closed their doors at the same time so they didn't have to hear anything about this devil's cry. The people who accompanied the flower float stood in front of the restaurant and cried all night. The crying echoed, and everyone could hear. This continued until the sun rose the next day. The sun gradually illuminated all things. The glittering rays gradually appeared. All of the people from last night disappeared, and that night the first 7 people burned to death in the restaurant were the people who sang. After that, the investors had to renovate the burned restaurant to restore what the fire had caused. During the renovation, there was a carpenter who encountered something strange. Everyone who was involved in the rebuilding of the restaurant was present. The carpenter was just doing his job when he suddenly stopped. He looked very scary, and there was something very unusual about him. He was like a lost soul. People called him but he didn't hear them. It was like someone was hypnotizing him as he slowly started walking straight to the window. Colleagues did not even react in time and tried to call him back, but he completely lost his mind. He jumped out of the window to the bottom. He fell and died on the spot, and everyone knew then that he had no reason to commit suicide. A few days after that suicide, another worker suddenly climbed onto the table in the middle of the working day. It was like he was being controlled by someone. He sang Cantonese opera. While he was from another region, he couldn't even understand Cantonese opera. They said he was probably harassed by some spirit that died in the fire. After multiple attempts, the restaurant was rebuilt, but in the end, it was still demolished in 2006. Strange things about it have been handed down to this day. This is what happened to my friend. Even when I thought about that, I was still terrified of it, and it still haunted me to this day. I was having a relaxing time that night while playing some games. I like to play raids, and this was my only hobby. My work was also quite easy. After I came home from work, I sat at the computer to play a few games to relieve the stress. The evening was my favorite time. I was about to go to war in the game when suddenly my phone rang. It was late at night and I was curious to who was calling, and late calls really pissed me off. Because I didn't want to miss the game, I didn't want to pick up the phone, but just glanced to see who was calling and who was disturbing me at this hour. It was from my good friend. His name was Ben. He grew up with me when we were little, and then we went to the same university again. I reluctantly picked up the phone. I didn't know if it was so urgent that he called me at this late at night, even though he was a close friend, because that was my resting time. Well, as a result, it wasn't my friend Ben. It was someone from the hospital who called from his phone. My mind started to get confused with a lot of thoughts. I quickly went to the hospital, although the person on the phone didn't say what happened to my friend. It was probably very urgent, so I quickly left. I got dressed and ran downstairs. I was really worried about Ben. Maybe he had an accident or something. So he was rushed to the hospital. I called a taxi and asked the driver to take me to the hospital. Fortunately, in the middle of the night, I still could catch a taxi. The car rushed to the hospital. The scene outside was now pitch black. The traffic was also not crowded, and there were only a few taxis on the road then. On the way, many people were burning votive papers. I suddenly remembered that today was the day of worshipping the dead soul. On this day, paper money for dead souls was everywhere on the street. When I got to the hospital, I was called in by a nurse, and she told me that my friend was in the operating room. She called me after looking at my friend's phone with my phone number. He was taken to the operating room. His condition must have been very serious. I rushed in and asked, "Did he really have an accident? I pray he's okay." Luckily, he seemed to be fine. So I asked him what happened. "Are you okay? What happened to you?" He seemed to have just woken up, and he couldn't remember what happened. The nurse asked me to pay for his hospital bills and needed to rest now. Then I went out with the nurse. On the way, she told me about Ben's condition. The nurse said Ben was brought to the hospital in a very strange and very scared state. A taxi driver took him to the hospital and called the emergency room. At first she thought it was the driver who caused the accident of Ben. Then Ben was screaming in pain. His face was sweaty and pale, and Ben seemed to have no strength left. His belly was distended and swollen like a pregnant woman's. His shirt seemed to have broken all the buttons, and he looked like he had been hit by evil or had eaten something, so he was poisoned. He was given a gastric lavage after the examination. Even the cleaning process took a long time, but fortunately he was brought here in time, or he might have not been saved. The nurse said he spat out a lot of strange things. They didn't know what he ate, but the horrible stench was overwhelming. When I finally understood Ben's condition, I went to the ATM to withdraw money and take it to pay for his hospital bills. When I returned to the hospital room, my friend Ben became more awake. He told me what he remembered, and Ben began to recount. His face was still showing horror. He said that after coming home from work, he and his colleagues went out together to drink. After drinking too much, Ben was not sober. They said goodbye to each other and Ben seemed to be drunk. He could no longer stand properly. Because the street was dark and he was drunk, Ben quickly wanted to take a taxi home. I didn't know what happened and I just had to listen to his story. Then Ben's legs started to wobble. He couldn't stand anymore and fell to the ground. Ben was dreamy in his drunkenness. His face was red and he was surrounded by a bunch of fruit that rolled from nowhere. Ben saw some apples on the edge of his head. He wasn't awake at the time, so he picked an apple and picked it up. Ben started to put the apple in his mouth. His mouth opened wide to bite the ripe apple. While he was eating, he felt someone standing next to him. He glanced up. He was still chewing on an apple in his mouth. It was a strange man. He was very tall. The old man angrily glared at Ben as Ben had just committed something terrible. Now Ben looked closely, and he saw that his face was very strange. The man didn't look like a normal person at all. He seemed to be paying attention to the apples. Ben quickly picked up another apple from the ground and gave it to the man. At this moment, a car drove up, its light shining on him, but strangely the car had no intention of rebuilding. More frightening, the car hit the old man, but strangely he suddenly disappeared like smoke. The car also stopped in front of Ben. It almost hit him. The driver poked his head out and howled at Ben. "Hey, you want to die? What the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!" My friend suddenly felt an unbearable stomach ache and he started to sweat a lot. In pain, he screamed, clutching his stomach and rolling around on the ground. The kind driver put him in the car and took him to the hospital. When I heard him say that he ate something on the ground, I suddenly thought of something. On the way to the hospital, I also saw a lot of people burning things on the side of the road. Today is the day they worship dead people. The apples my friend picked up on the ground were offered to the dead. Most likely, the old man he saw was a ghost. My friend was punished or maybe cursed, and he almost lost his life. Is it true as they say? The dead will always claim their things back. This story happened about 2 years ago. It was the darkest day of my life, and I am still haunted by the events of that year to this day. Because of work and life pressure, I suffered from severe insomnia and mild depression. So much had happened to me, and it made me really tired, and I gradually fell into a deadlock. The doctor prescribed me a lot of medicine and told me to remember to drink the drugs on time, get enough rest, and not stay up late to recover quickly. My boss also fired me because I could not guarantee the company's work. Fortunately, I had a good boyfriend. My boyfriend was always with me. He always supported me in everything, and because of that, I had more motivation to get well quickly. My boyfriend's house was in the city, and I was in the countryside. Part of the pressure also came from our love story. His family didn't accept me because my situation and his were very different. His parents expected him to find a daughter-in-law who was also suitable for his family. Meanwhile, my family was not well off. He said his mother invited me to his house for dinner, but it seemed that his mother didn't like me at all. She invited me to come, perhaps to let me think for myself and withdraw. My boyfriend encouraged and supported me a lot at the time. If it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't have made it through what happened. I really wanted to marry him and prepare for a future life with him. However, his family was a big obstacle for me. Maybe I chose the wrong time to meet his parents. While I was suffering from mental problems and my health was declining, I went to see his parents with a tired appearance. The meal that day was rich with many dishes, but I hardly touched my chopsticks. His mother said that he and I were very young, so marriage should be carefully considered. Although his mother didn't say it directly, his mother always wanted us to separate. I even thought that I really didn't deserve their son, and I thought he would listen to his parents and leave me soon. On the way home at this time it was already dark, and there were very few people passing by. He and I went together, but no one said any word to anyone. He reassured me that he would work hard for our future, but I felt that even if he and I got married, life would not be easy. Maybe in the next day or two we should stop seeing each other temporarily. That night I had to take sleeping pills to be able to sleep. As soon as I fell asleep, I was awakened by the vibrating sound of my phone, and it was none other than a text from my boyfriend. As a hunch, I had a bad feeling when my boyfriend texted me at this hour. He wanted to spend quality time with his mother, and his mother would accept me, but he was forced by her to marry someone else. My boyfriend wanted us to be apart for a while, but it was all too understandable that he wanted to break up with me. The news really shocked me and I cried a lot. I really couldn't accept it. I felt like I had nothing left. At this point I lost everything. I was empty-handed, I lost my job, and now I couldn't keep my lover. I didn't know how long I cried until my mind went numb and I fell asleep. I couldn't think anymore and I slowly fell into a dream. After I fell asleep, I suddenly felt that there was another person in my room, but I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move and I couldn't see the stranger's face. He carefully walked over to my bed and crept up step by step. Then he started to say something in my ear with a strange voice. "Are you desperate?" Every time he said a word, my heart broke. He continued to say, "No one cares about you, no one cares about your life, even if you die." He was right. I shouldn't live anymore because when I was young, my parents wanted me to die to give birth to another brother. From childhood to adulthood, no one acknowledged me and no one liked me, not even my boyfriend. And in the 30 years of my life, I have done nothing, with no house and no car in my hand. At that point, I just wanted to end my life. And that man said he would help me. He helped me up and then he continued to whisper that he would get me free. I grabbed the rope. I looked up at the roof with my mind completely blank. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. And on the ceiling there was no place or crossbar to tie the rope. He helped me. He took my arm and I obeyed him completely. He went to the headboard and tied one end of the rope to the headboard. My heart was confused. I didn't want to die. My body didn't listen to me. After he finished tying the rope, he turned to give it to me. I started wrapping the rope around my neck. At this point I still didn't realize what I was doing. I leaned forward and the tight zipper pulled my neck back. I was short of breath for a moment. My tears were also flowing a lot. I rolled my eyes and my consciousness became hazy. I started to feel everything go dark in front of me. As soon as I sobered up a bit, I heard the loud knocks. The sound was far from too near, from dim to clear. I had become more conscious but couldn't get rid of the rope. After a moment of sobriety, I saw the ceiling appear clear, no longer blurred. I opened my eyes. My whole body was drenched in sweat, and I found myself still lying on the bed. And it was my boyfriend who was knocking on the door. He was outside, banging on the door and screaming. I looked around the house, surprised to see no one. I felt like I just had a dream. It was a real nightmare. I climbed out of bed and went to open the door for my boyfriend. My boyfriend immediately rushed over and hugged me. He asked me to forgive him. His appearance that night saved me and my life. We then decided to get married, and his family gradually accepted me. I got a new job and also moved into his house. But one day, I read some scary news. In my old motel room, a young man committed suicide due to depression, and he also committed suicide exactly the way I dreamt about it that very night. This story originated from a hobby of mine. I love collecting antiques, and it was this hobby that got me involved in a very peculiar incident. I loved buying weird antiques. The appearance of those items also had to be very special to attract my attention, and the best place to buy these was at the antique market. It was busy there, with buyers and sellers coming in and out. I couldn't distinguish between real and fake antiques because many of the fake ones were carved very accurately. I loved going to the antique market. In addition to real and fake antiques, there were many other things such as food, fruit, clothes, etc. It was interesting to watch buyers and sellers bid against each other. I went to the antique market when I had nothing to do that day, but no antique caught my attention. When I passed a few stalls, some things placed on the ground attracted me. I had found something I liked. It seemed that the thing in front of my eyes was rare and also very strange. That item held me back. I saw a lot of skulls on the same stall, and I had never seen such strange items before. Those skulls were inlaid with silver, some inlaid with precious stones. They were all intricately carved, and they had different beauty. I also felt that these skulls were very unusual, so I sat down and looked at them. They were eye-catching, and they had been sculpted wonderfully. I picked up one and said to the owner, "Is this a real antique?" He said they were handcrafts and not antiques, but these were very rare. I wanted to buy one, so I asked him about its price. I also thought its price would not be low because it looked very different. "You will love this vase. Congratulations, it has found an owner." I was curious about what the owner said, but I liked this vase. The owner told me that this vase was imported directly from Nepal by him. The owner also told me to rest assured about its quality. After a while of bidding, I bought one at a reasonable price. I felt happy that I got such a unique item. I brought that skull home. It was probably one of the fanciest items I had gotten my hands on until now. I added it to my collection, and the more I looked at it, the more I liked it. The vase had a beauty that made people feel a little bit of a shiver. It was kind of a combination of death and art because it looked so magical. I already had all the items I liked, and I put the vase in the most prominent place. Horrible things happened that night. I never thought it was that skull that brought me terrible nightmares. That night I went to bed as usual after a long tiring day at work. I had a strange feeling even though I was fast asleep. I felt like someone was staring at me while I was sleeping. I couldn't bear the feeling anymore, so I started looking in the direction. Then I saw something stand beside my bed. I had yet to react to what was in front of my eyes. In front of me appeared to be a very large fat man, but because it was so dark, I couldn't see clearly. My eyes continued to look upward to see that it was indeed a man. Terrified when I realized it was a man without a head, his upper body was empty. My sleepiness disappeared when I witnessed a horrible scene. I sat up in panic, a look of terror on my face. But when I sat up, the man was gone. I sat there stunned for more than 10 seconds, checking myself to see if I was awake or dreaming. I didn't think it was a dream, so I got out of the bed and wanted to go to the living room to check. As a result, there was nothing in the living room. Everything was not what I expected. I suddenly thought of the skull that I bought from the antique dealer. I thought I could see something terrible, but I didn't see anything either. That skull was still on display, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. I didn't know why I thought of that headless man relating to this skull. I went back to bed and started going back to sleep, hoping I wouldn't have any more nightmares. Not long after I lay down, I felt the headless man standing next to my bed again. I didn't wake up this time. I wanted to see what he would do. That man just stood beside my bed without moving. He didn't move and I didn't dare to move. I just pretended to be asleep while laying there. And I stayed like that until the dawn dawned and sunlight began to shine into my room. When the headless man was no longer standing on the bed, I dared to stand up. I thought the problem was with that skull, so I took a day off from the company and brought the skull to the antique market. The stall where I bought the skulls had no stalls and was not fixed in place. I asked the stall owner next door if he knew the Nepalese man selling there. That stall owner told me that the Nepal owner was taken away by the police. I thought that maybe he had committed a crime by selling a real human skull. This thought made me have to guess old and young because I didn't know how true it was. I stood there dumbfounded because I didn't know what to do. I exited the antique market and turned into a small alley nearby. I looked at the skull and wondered if it was a real skull. After thinking about it, I decided to send it to the police station. I explained everything and the police did not confuse me with it. The police jotted down a few details and said that if there was any problem, they would get back to me. A few days later, I got a call from the police. They said the Nepal owner was a smuggler of real skulls from Nepal. I had goosebumps at that time when I thought about that picture of me playing with a skull.